Howdy. This video that you're about to see was recorded a couple of years back and on a previous channel that no longer is functioning. But I figured I put a lot of effort into it and a lot of time and scripted it. So I want to put it back up and share it with you now. If you're at all curious or confused by London Cockney slang, then this is an explanation. Howdy everyone, and welcome to London, the heart of the capital and the only true home of the Cockney, the much revered and much imitated, much misunderstood true Londoners. And what does it all mean? What do they mean? What are they saying? What are they talking about? Today I'm going to try and make 18 pence of it all. Over there is the Smithfield Rosanna Arquette, and that little alleyway there leads to St Bartholomew the Great left in the lurch, and this is St Bartholomew the Great's hospital. No, there's no slang for hospital, it is just hospital. But one piece of information you probably didn't know is that I was born in there a few donkeys back. Yeah. I was born in the diddle of July, just before midnight, and within the sound of the bells of St Mary Le Bow Church. And that little fact means that I can claim to be a true Cockney. Or is that an Irish Jew David on? Not making any sense? Hopefully it will in a bit, because today we're going to explain all about the Cockneys and their rhyming slang. Now, before we get any further, it should be said that my old man, or my skin and blister, would have been better at explaining this and sounding more authentic. I was brought up in a family of slang speakers, and I know it, but I don't tend to use it so much, apart from when I used to work on the market or the Rosanna Arquette a few years back. Well, let's start with the origin of the word. A Cockney originally meant an infertile egg, but one possible story of how it became to mean the true Londoner was written by a Captain Gross in 1811. He told the story of how a young Rob Roy saw a bottle crying out and shouted, "Here, how that nag crows." A man standing by corrected him and said, "It's not a crow, it's a neigh." The next morning, the kid opened the window and screamed out, "Here, how that cock neighs." Hearing the bird cry out and call in the morning, a man standing by mistook the shout to mean the costermonger or street hawkers that was walking past, screaming out, calling out his wares. The word was passed on from that point on to mean a workman, a costermonger, a stevedore, a road sweeper. All of those became known as Cockneys, and in time Cockneys. So what makes a true Cockney, and why here? Well, that is the church of St Mary Le Bow in Cheapside, not Bow Bells in Bromley. Peal the bells at St Mary Le Bow. That's it. That's what makes a Cockney. You're born, and within the scope of those bells, that sound, that makes you a true Cockney. Bart's Hospital around the corner is one of the few hospitals still within the sound. In times gone past, before there were sherbet dabs and Uncle Gus's filling the roads, blocking the sound off, that sound of those bells used to travel a carpet north, west and south, and even cockle miles east. And that's why the East Enders claim themselves to be true Cockneys. These days, jam jars and the like, the sound doesn't carry anywhere near as far. And so, St Bartholomew Hospital is one of the few places that actually still hears the peal of the bells of St Mary Le Bow. This is Bread Street, the site of the start of the Great Fire of London. fire started in the bakers down here and spread. It didn't stop and took out most of what was then the city of London, all the way down to the Thames and London Bridge. These days the city's a lot bigger and a lot louder, but still the city of London. Now, pearly kings and queens are the most iconic of all Cockneys. There was one, Henry Croft, who was considered the first pearly king of London. He was born in 1862 and lived most of his life in an orphanage in Somerstown, and left at the age of 13 to go to Captain Kirk and be a frog sweeper, frog and toad road. While sweeping the streets and the local market, he would see the costermongers, the fruit and Uncle Reg sellers, and they would always stand out. They would always be a little bit different, a little bit snazzier, a little bit sharper. They'd wear a row of pearls down the seams of their shirts and their trousers. And Henry, being a nice kid that he was, wanted to help those little nippers back at the orphanage that he'd grown up with, because they were poor and they needed a bit of bread and honey, you know? And so he saw that the costermongers were always having a whip round to help someone out if they were in a bit of trouble, or a bit of a leg up, just a bit of a boost. Henry, seeing this, thought, that's a good idea, I'm going to do that for the kids at the orphanage. So he started trying to gather money, but people weren't interested in just giving some dirty nipper on the street money, so he realised he needed to look a bit dapper. So with the help of the local costers on the market, he got himself a right fancy whistle, covered in buttons, mother of pearl buttons from lapel to hem. Then he started prancing around and trying to get some bees for the little ones. And it worked. He got loads of dosh for the orphans, and word got out, and lots of hospitals and lurches all over started calling on these services, trying to get him to help them make some bread and honey. And sure enough, it worked. And he became known as the Pearly King of London. And in time, there were pearly queens, princes, princesses, and they became synonymous with the Cockneys. These days, however, pearly kings and queens, well, they tend to be not quite of the same ilk, shall we say. The Pearly King of Norwood or the Pearly Queen of Greenwich. Not quite people that were born within the sound of the Bow Bells, as we've discussed. All manner of places that are nowhere near and clearly have no chance of hearing the peal of the Bow Bells. The accent and dialect is as iconic as any of these buildings, and it's much attempted to be copied, and many people try to decode the rhyming slang. Many try, but few actually succeed. See, it is a bit of an a la mode, a bit of a secret, and part of that is because the slang changes over time. To say he's on the Adrian Mole these days doesn't mean anything, but to say he's on the Cheryl Cole means he's on the dole, he's unemployed, he's drawing benefit from the government. It changes over time to stay current, and that's why it's been with us since 1800s and still is used today, although many try it and fail, and that has bred a new breed, the Mockney. The Mockneys are those that try a little bit too hard to be a Cockney. They often search out really archaic terms or put on the accent. The king of these, of course, is Jamie Oliver, Essex-born lad from a middle-class family. He moved to Shoreditch/Old Street in his early 20s and pretended to be this true East End Cockney kid when truth was born nowhere near the bells. But he put on this accent and he pretended to be a right geezer, and everyone caught him out. Everyone knew that he wasn't, and thus was born the Mockney. These days, to be a Mockney is more trendy than to be a true Cockney. Of course, Cockney rhyme slang is not the only slang language of London. The gay community of Soho in the West End had a rather elaborate slang of their own called Polari. But unlike the rhyming slang, it was mostly just badly pronounced bits of Italian and not quite as detailed and involved. But it still had its purpose. It still had its secrets. What secrets are they? Whether it's Polari or Cockney rhyming slang, it's to be able to speak to your friends about somebody without them knowing. In Polari, a plate was a guy's rear end, and to shout out he's got a nice plate was to indicate that you fancied the back of him. Cockney rhyming slang, however, is a little bit more involved, and that's where we come to the iconic and most overused slang of them all, apples and pears. Let's find some stairs. No true Cockney's ever going to say, I'm going up the apples and pears, or the apples. They're just going to say, I'm going upstairs. Anyone saying apples and pears is instantly going to be marked out as Sexton Blake, fake. The reason being is, for the most part, rhyming slang is only said in the first word. For purposes of this video, I've said a fair few whole phrases just to make it clear. But generally, you would just say bottle or whistle. You wouldn't say a whistle and flute suit, because it's kind of known that if you're going to say apples and pears, you're going to say apples, and your mate who you're talking to is going to know that the pears come after the apples and they rhyme with stairs. Simple. So market traders and costermongers and so forth would stand on the market and shout out, "Here George, check out that syrup on his loaf, and look at them Jekylls. Who's he think he is? Lord Muck?" To which George would reply, "No, Harry, he's not Lord Muck, he's just a J. Arthur." Which would mean, well, look at that toupee on his head, and look at those trousers. Who does he think he is? The richest man in London? And George, he replied, "No, Harry, he's just a J. Arthur." So you got that one. You're learning. Over there behind a ton of scaffolding opposite the hospital used to be the Guild Hall, where the guilds of London, the butchers, the bakers, candlestick makers, farriers, stevedores, all of those, well, would now be unions, would meet and discuss their business, their plights, and amongst these rules, regulations and proceedings, one was to announce the new Pearly King of London. Much like the Lord Mayor of London has a procession first weeks of November and is announced, and for 1 year he is the new Mayor. At the Guild Hall meetings, the Pearly King for the year was announced. Now, however, somewhere hidden behind that lot is what's left of the Guild Hall. Of course, Guild Hall is now synonymous with School for Music. The popular TV show Only Fools and Horses gave many people an insight into Cockney banter and way of life, etc. Del Boy and Rodney, but South London Rodneys. And of course, Del Boy's parlay and way of saying stuff and speaking was synonymous with what it is to be Cockney. Lovely jubbly, we're going to be millionaires, dipstick, and of course the classic "you plonker." All phrases, all modern terms, all modern ways of saying many different things, not necessarily slang, but Cockney terms and Cockney ways of saying things that wouldn't be said anywhere else. I hope this was fun and educational, and if it was, give it a thumbs up and leave me some banter down below, and remember to click the stay alive button. I made that one up myself. That's a bit Mockney. And yeah, take a butcher's at some old videos in the timeline and come back lager and lime. See ya. Norwood, and why is it every single time? Every time you feel something stands behind you. But they fell, and I'm fluffing this like you wouldn't believe. Could stand on the... There's a random guy dancing on the table over there. Syrup on his barney. That's wrong. Oh, his loaf. Where did I get barney from? Oh, blimey, how do you do that, you old codger? George replied, no Arthur, no Harry. He's just a... fuggles.